Practice take 2. Oh, I hope I don't have to fart.
You recorded that, you idiot.
Okay, it's okay. Ready? Okay, my hair is messed up.
Oh my god.
Oh, you Okay, ready? Hi guys, welcome back to the Knitty Hippie vlog. If you've never been here before, my name is Michelle. If this is your last
Why are you such an idiot?
I'm just tired.
It just tasted your hair.
It doesn't taste as good as it smells, does it?
Or looks.
Get back there.
Oh.
Down. Sit, Ubu, sit. Good dog.
I'm not even sitting.
This is
I'm
how I
just
treat my
crouching.
teenage daughter. Okay.
All's good.
I promise.
Take 3.
Don't call social
Take
services.
3.
Take 27. Okay. Hi guys. Welcome to the Knitty Hippie vlog. If this is your first time here, my name is Michelle. If this is your second time, maybe third time here, welcome back. Today's vlog, we are going to talk about size does matter. I know what you're thinking, you dirty-minded people. Okay, I couldn't see you crawl away.
You're
that
so
was pretty
stupid.
Hi guys, welcome back to the Knitty Hippie vlog. If this is your first time here, my name is Michelle. If you've come back to see me again, thank you so much. I appreciate all your support. I appreciate everyone who subscribed and left me wonderful comments, and I hope you guys will come back for more. Today's vlog is about size does matter. I know what you're thinking, but I'm talking about yarn. So when it comes to yarn, there are several different weights of yarn, and a friend of mine specifically requested that I do this video because as a new knitter, sometimes all the different sizes of yarn are confusing. So I'm hoping that today's vlog will demystify that for you. So depending on what website you go to, they're gonna tell you that there are like 6, 7, 8 different weights of yarn. Some websites like Ravelry and yarnstandards.com have different charts that they use, so just remember that when you're looking at yarns. For the most part though, at least here in the US, the yarns will have a label on it that tells you what weight it is, and a lot of times there'll be a little skein of yarn with a number on it. And that also is telling you what category the weight of yarn is in. So this one is a thread weight yarn. Sometimes they call it cobweb. Some people even call it crochet thread. And I think that's because mostly crocheters use it to make doilies and table runners and things like that. So this is what that looks like. And you can see it's very, very thin. Just a little thread of yarn. See? So this one isn't usually categorized with a number. It's just called thread weight yarn. So there's that one. The next one that we have, which a lot of times on the label will say 0 on the skein of yarn, and it's lace weight yarn. And again, it's very thin strands of yarn. And usually this is good for shawls, things like that. I have several patterns for some airy cardigans that also use this, but a lot of people use this for shawls. And that, again, that one's gonna say a 1 on it typically, a 0 on it typically. And then the next weight that you would have is a fingering weight yarn. And this is what I use for socks. So sometimes it'll say sock weight. I think a lot of times they're used interchangeable. I did see on a couple charts that it said light fingering and sock weight as the same, and then fingering weight as a different category. The chart that I typically use has fingering weight as a 1, so it'll have lace as 0, and then fingering or light fingering weight and sock yarn as a size 1. So this one you can see on the label here, it says fingering weight. And if you look down here, there's a little skein with a 1 on it, just to kind of tell you what weight it is. And this one is still pretty thin. If you knit socks, then you kind of know the thickness, but see, it's not much bigger than the lace weight. That's enough to make a difference. Typically, sock yarns can vary a little bit, especially if it's one that maybe is spun by the seller as opposed to on a machine. I'm pretty sure this was probably spun on a machine. So it might be a little bit inconsistent, but as long as the label says 1, you can typically get away with knitting socks with it. Okay, so then the next one up on the list here, get the tag out, would be a sport weight yarn. So that's, again, a little bit thicker than sock yarn, and you can even make socks with it, but typically it's a little bit thicker. And this one is, can you see that? My camera doesn't want to focus today, but this is a sport weight. So as you can see, we're slowly getting thicker here. And typically that one is listed as a 2 on the little skein on the label. And then the next one that we would have is DK weight, which I believe stands for double knit. Not that that really matters to most people when they're just regular old knitters like me. So the DK weight is the next one, and that would be, I lost it. I know, by now I should be getting my stuff together and figuring it out, right? Okay, so this is DK weight, and this is listed as a number 3. So again, the lace weight was 0, fingering weight 1, sport weight 2, and DK weight 3. So this is the DK weight, and you can see it's still pretty thin, but it's getting there. Can you see that? So that's DK weight, again listed as number 3 on the label. All right, and then your next one that's a pretty standard size that most people use is worsted weight yarn. Now with the worsted weight yarn, I have a little swatch here for you. A lot of people use this to make sweaters, baby bibs, pretty much whatever. It's probably one, I would say it's one of the most common sizes that people use. So this one is a worsted weight yarn, and you can see the strands are a little bit thicker. And this one is nice, it works up pretty quickly because it's a little bit thicker. And this one's listed, like I said, as a number 4 on the label. And then the next one that we would go to is an Aran weight yarn or heavy worsted yarn. A lot of times they put that again as an interchangeable title. So this one is Aran weight yarn. Can you see that? It's a little bit thicker, getting into the little bit thicker category. This one's really good for sweaters because it is a little bit more bulky. The sweaters knit up a lot quicker, but it's still nice and squishy. So that's an Aran weight or heavy worsted. And that one is listed as a number 5. So then what used to be, I think kind of the end all for the chart was a size 6. A lot of yarns weren't much bigger than that. And that is bulky. Bulky yarn is a size 6. You can see here, we're getting a lot thicker. It's pretty cool. Again, really good for sweaters, maybe outdoor knits, or sometimes for toys, things like that. So that's, again, a lot thicker. And then the next one that I have is super bulky. Super bulky yarn, and again, I don't even know if they put a number on this, but I guess if they did, it'd be a 7. But I think it's been a fairly new size that people have been using. So this one is bulky. And this particular one, you can see it's almost like it's just a piece of wool just twisted a little bit. But that's bulky weight yarn. A lot of people use that for rugs and pillows, toys. Sometimes you can do like the huge blankets with it. Sometimes people use this for arm knitting. I found that it was just way too big of stitches when I tried to use the super bulky yarn to make the arm blanket. I feel like if you're gonna do that, you need to do the jumbo yarn, but I don't have an example of that for you. Sometimes the jumbo yarn, they'll use like a big nylon rope is what it kind of looks like, or they will just use wool and just kind of stretch it out so that it's a little bit thicker. So that's the different sizes of yarn. The problem with the weights of yarn is on the label, they also a lot of time will say the word ply. Ply can be very confusing for people because a long time ago, they used to use ply as the standard for measurement. And what I mean by that is there was only so many different weights of yarn. So if you wanted to make socks, then they might say, here's a 2-ply yarn. And then they use that for socks. Or they might say, okay, for a sweater, then you would use 8 or 10 ply for the sweater. Just meaning that those yarns were always consistent with that size. But because it really depends on the person that's spinning the yarn, it depends on how small the strands of wool or whatever fiber are when you twist them together, that changes. So you can't just automatically say that, oh, a 2-ply yarn is a stock weight yarn. And so plies are the individual strands of yarn that are worked together to form a plied yarn. So what you do is you take these very thin or thick layers of yarn that you've spun, and then you spin those strands together. Depending on how many strands you've spun together, that's how many ply your yarn is. So usually a single strand on its own isn't usually called a ply though. It's usually just known as a singles because, I mean, calling it a 1-ply yarn doesn't really make any sense because it's just one strand. So most of the time, the number of plies, like I said, doesn't usually have anything to do with the thickness. You could have a bulky yarn that only has 2 plies, and you can have a really thin yarn that maybe has 4 plies, which is probably unheard of because that would be a lot of very small pieces of yarn that someone would have to spin and then twist together. That seems like a lot of work. So basically someone is taking 2 or more strands of yarn, thin or thick, and twisting them together to create the yarn. So the final product of the strands twisted together is going to determine your weight of yarn. So that's kind of what ply means. So you don't have to pay a lot of attention to that when you're looking for yarns. Just try to figure out what weight the pattern is calling for as far as lace, sock, worsted, and try to focus on that as opposed to the ply or maybe some of the other things on the label that are confusing you. Forgive me, I have really bad allergies. I've had a very sick little boy at home this week, so bear with me. Okay, something else to remember when it comes to yarns is they always come with a label. Well, typically they always come with a label. So you've got your label. And as you can see, this one is not connected to my yarn. And the reason that is because I took the hank of yarn that I received in the mail, I put it on my yarn swift, and I wound it into a ball. So after that, what I usually do is I usually roll up the label like this and stick it down in the center of the yarn. So we have like this, and I would just stick it down in the center of that, is because this is how it would come out after I've wound it. Sometimes that doesn't happen, and then we end up losing the labels, and then we have no clue what weight yarn it is, and we've got this beautiful yarn sitting there, and we have no idea what to use it for because we don't know what weight it is. And the last thing you want to do is use the wrong weight yarn because you guessed, and then have the pattern not be the right measurement that it says in there. So I'm going to give you guys a few tips on how to figure out what weight of yarn that you have if you don't have the label. So something that I have is a wooden knitting gauge, and I really love this. You can buy these on Etsy. Several different stores sell them. I believe even places like Knit Picks and stuff sell stuff like this. I prefer the wooden ones just because I think they're kind of cool. I got this one surprise, surprise, and a subscription box from Artistic Yarn by Abby. So here you go, there's this. And see, it's got like a little ruler on it. It's got a little section that you can lay it on your yarn. And what this does is you can knit up a little swatch, and we'll talk about that more later. But then you can lay this on top and measure how many stitches per inch you're getting. But first I want to talk about figuring out the yarn weight on your own. So what they do is they do something called wraps per inch. And what that is you take the yarn and you wrap it around the ruler starting at the beginning and wrap it all the way around until you get past 1 inch so that you can get a good measurement. And you want to wrap the yarn around where it's touching side by side and not overlapping. And you don't want to do it too tight because obviously that can stretch out the yarn and then you're going to mess up your entire count. So just wrap it around at a normal tension. And then after you've got done wrapping it a little bit past 1 inch so you can measure really well, count how many wraps you have in a 1 inch little section. And when you do that, then you can go to different places like Ravelry, yarnstandards.com, and things like that, and find a chart, and it'll tell you that the chart is WPI, wraps per inch, and you look up the number of wraps that you have and see where that lands you. So here's just an example of one chart that I found. And you can see right here is the different weights. And then this is the wraps per inch. So you wrap it around the thing and let's say you only get 3 wraps in that inch. Then if you look down here where it says jumbo, it says 0 to 4 wraps per inch means that it's a jumbo weight yarn. So if you have one and it's 13 wraps around the ruler, then it's probably a DK weight. And I've noticed some of the websites differ with their numbers, but in general, they're all about the same depending on what website you go to. So you should be able to figure it out just based on that. I found this at Ravelry, and it's really, really helpful. Now here's the thing. If you don't have something like this, that's fine. Not all of us have these things, or they don't think to buy them, or they don't want to buy them. You can use anything with a consistent width all the way across. So a pencil, because they're typically consistent all the way along the handle. You can wrap the yarn around that and measure it. You can use a regular ruler if you have a regular ruler at home. If you use something like a pencil, then you just take your tape measure or ruler and lay it up next to it and just count how many stitches are wrapped around in an inch. That simple. It seems like it would be difficult, but like I said, once you have the chart, you can get a basic idea of what yarn weight you have by doing that. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about is getting gauge. A lot of people are confused by that as well. They don't understand what that means. A lot of patterns will say 20 stitches in 27 rows equals 4 inches. Well, what the heck does that mean? Well, what that means is that when you lay a ruler on a square, within a 4-inch square, so let's say you've knitted a gauge, a little square, it measures 4 by 4 inches. In that, you will have 20 stitches in 4 inches, and you will have 27 rows within that 4 inches. So they're saying that if you knit with the yarn needles and the yarn of your choice, and you get 20 inches and 27 rows in 4 inches, then it'll work for the pattern. So that means that you will match the gauge that the knitter used that made the pattern so that you get the same measurements. Especially for a sweater, this is really important. If you want to be a really precise knitter, then they'll tell you to wash the yarn before you measure it. I don't do that, and typically my stuff turns out okay. So it depends on how precise and how crazy you want to be. I typically don't do that. So what you want to do is, this is my gauge swatch. Just, you saw that earlier, just to give you an example. So with this one, I picked my needle size. I believe I used a 9 or a 10 for this. And then this is worsted weight yarn. And I just cast it on. They said 20 inches. So it was like 18 or 19 stitches by 20 rows or something like that. Not 20 inches, 20 rows, equals, 4 inches. So when they say that, what I typically do for my swatch is if they're saying 20 inches, then I will, 20 stitches, then I will cast on like 24, 25. That way you're casting on a few more than they're asking for, just to really give you some leeway. And then if they say 27 rows, then I'll knit like 30 rows, just so I have a little extra to measure on. And just like I was showing you earlier, you'll take your swatch, you'll lay your ruler on top of it, and then you'll count how many stitches are in 1 to 4 inches, depending on what they're asking you for in the pattern. So if it says 20 stitches in 4 inches, then you're gonna get approximately 5 stitches per inch. I can't talk today. So that's what you wanna do for a swatch. Now, if you measure your swatch and you are getting too few stitches in your measurement, so if you're not getting enough stitches, if they say there's 20 in there and you're only getting 18, then you probably knit a little bit looser than the person that made the pattern. So if that's the case, then you want to go down a needle size so that you can try and squeeze more stitches into there. Now, if you are getting too many stitches in that little period or in that little section in 1 inch or in 4 inches or whatever they're asking for, if you're getting too many, then you might want to go up a needle size and knit a little bit bigger so that you can squeeze the amount of stitches in there that they're asking for. And if it's not perfect and you're okay with that, then go for it. Why not? But if you want the same measurements that they're getting in that pattern, then you need to try and follow gauge. This is really important when it comes to things like the picturing yarn that Artistic Yarn by Abby does. And I know I talk about her a lot. I'm sorry. I have a lot of her stuff. So when it comes to picturing yarn, you really need to get gauge with the size 2 needles so that the picture shows up and lines up properly. So when someone says that you need to get gauge in a pattern, it's very important for certain things, and for other things, it's not so important. If I'm making a big blanket, I don't really care. It doesn't matter to me because it's just a big blanket. So really getting gauge involves 3 different things: needle size, the yarn weight, and then your knitting gauge, or your knitting tension, how you knit. Some people knit a little bit looser, some people are tighter knitters. This whole video is starting to sound very, very dirty. Anyway, so because of that, then, your knitting tension is your knitting tension. You can't really change that unless you want to change your entire style of knitting. Most people don't want to. They're used to what they have. So that set aside, you need to just focus on the yarn weight and the proper needles to fit the gauge. Once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad. Most people don't want to take the time to do a swatch, but again, sometimes it's really important and other times it just doesn't matter. So it's really up to you. I'll leave it up to you. I'm bad about doing them, but for certain things, I definitely will do it. Okay, so that is all I have for you guys today. If you have any other questions about yarn, or maybe you're curious about maybe some of the brands of yarn that I held up and showed you today, or maybe I messed up something, maybe I forgot something, just leave a comment below and let me know, and I will try to answer your questions and get you on the right track. I will put in the description box some links to some of the charts, like the wraps per inch chart and the yarn weight charts. That way you can look at it and maybe kind of demystify it so that you're not so confused. Maybe you can print it off and put it in your yarn stash so that you can pull it out if you need it. If you have any other questions, let me know. If there's something that you guys want to see or a video that you want me to do, please leave a comment. Let me know. I'm open to suggestions. And until then, I'm hoping to see you guys next time. Come back and visit, like, comment, and subscribe, and let everyone know. Have a good weekend, guys. See you later.